race. We like to pretend we live in a post-racial society, a melting pot of unity and harmony. But let's be real, folks, that's about as believable as a Bollywood movie where the hero doesn't break into a spontaneous dance number. In this 10-minute exploration, we dive deep into some of the most controversial racial topics that continue to spark debate, examining the historical, social, and economic forces at play.
Check one, check two, check.
You know, it's funny. We love to throw around this phrase, post-racial, like it's some magical destination we've reached. We elected Obama, we watched Black Panther, we even have a black friend. We're good, right? Wrong. The idea of a post-racial world is a dangerous illusion, a smokescreen obscuring the very real systemic racism that persists today. It's like saying, I don't see color, which, by the way, is the whitest thing you can say. Sure, it might look better on the surface, but the damage runs deep. The media has a responsibility to do better, to move beyond token representation and engage with the complexities of race in a meaningful way. Because until we acknowledge the systemic issues, the deeply rooted inequalities that continue to plague our society, we're never going to move past them. The model minority, the group that's always held up as the shining example of what immigrants can achieve in America, the ones who are supposed to make everyone else feel bad about not being as successful. But let's unpack this myth, shall we? The model minority myth, often used to describe Asian Americans, is like that overachieving cousin everyone compares you to at family gatherings. Except in this case, it's not just annoying, it's harmful. The problem with this myth is that it sets unrealistic expectations and ignores the very real struggles that Asian Americans face. It creates a false dichotomy, pitting Asian Americans against other minority groups as if to say, look at them, they made it, why can't you? And let's not forget about the pressure this myth puts on Asian Americans themselves. They're constantly told to live up to this impossible standard, to be the good minority, the one that doesn't cause any trouble. The truth is, the model minority myth is just that, a myth. Let's talk about money, shall we? Specifically, the massive gaping chasm that is the racial wealth gap in this country. Here's the deal. Generational wealth, the money and assets passed down through families, plays a huge role in shaping economic opportunity. And guess what? Centuries of systemic racism have created a system where white families have a significant head start. We're talking redlining, discriminatory housing policies that prevented black families from buying homes in certain neighborhoods, thus denying them the opportunity to build wealth through home ownership. We're talking about slavery, a system that literally built this country on the backs of unpaid black labor, creating a wealth gap that persists to this day. And let's not forget about the present-day discrimination that continues to hold back black and brown communities. From predatory lending practices to disparities in education and employment opportunities, the deck is stacked against them from the start. So, what's the solution? Some argue that reparations, a system of compensating black Americans for the harms of slavery and Jim Crow, are not just a possibility, but a necessity. It's about recognizing that true equality cannot exist until we address the economic disparities that continue to plague our society. Chapter 4. We live in a world increasingly driven by algorithms. From the ads we see online to the loan applications we submit, our lives are shaped by lines of code that often operate in the shadows. But here's the thing, those lines of code aren't always as objective as we might think. In fact, they can be just as biased as the humans who wrote them. Think about it, facial recognition software that struggles to accurately identify black faces, leading to misidentification and even wrongful arrests. Algorithms used in hiring processes that perpetuate existing biases, making it harder for qualified candidates from underrepresented groups to get their foot in the door. These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a larger problem. The issue is that these algorithms are often trained on data sets that reflect the biases of the real world. This bias in technology has real-world consequences. It can perpetuate existing inequalities, reinforce harmful stereotypes, and limit opportunities for marginalized communities. We need to demand greater transparency and accountability from the companies that create these algorithms. Because in a world increasingly driven by technology, algorithmic bias has the potential to exacerbate existing inequalities and create new ones.
Chapter 5: The Intersection of Race and Crime.
The criminal justice system is supposed to be about justice, right? About fairness, about equality under the law. But for far too many people of color, the reality is a far cry from that ideal. It's a system where race can mean the difference between walking free and going to jail, between life and death. Let's talk about over-policing in black and brown communities. It's no secret that certain neighborhoods are patrolled more heavily, that residents are stopped and frisked more frequently, even when they're not suspected of any crime. This isn't about keeping communities safe, it's about control, about maintaining a system of power and oppression. And then there's racial profiling, the practice of targeting individuals for suspicion of crime based solely on their race or ethnicity. Once you're caught in the system, the disparities only get worse. Black and brown defendants are more likely to be arrested, less likely to be released on bail, and more likely to receive harsher sentences than their white counterparts, even when charged with the same crimes. The prison industrial complex, a term used to describe the overlapping interests of government and industry that profit from mass incarceration, further exacerbates these issues.
Chapter 6: Cultural Appropriation versus Appreciation.
Culture is cool, right? We love to celebrate different traditions, try new foods, listen to music from around the world. But there's a fine line between appreciating another culture and appropriating it. And unfortunately, that line is often blurred, especially in today's interconnected world. Cultural appropriation is like that friend who shows up to a party uninvited, eats all the food, drinks all the drinks, and then leaves without cleaning up. It's about taking elements of a culture that isn't your own, often without understanding their significance or respecting their origins, and using them for your own benefit. Think about it. Wearing traditional clothing as a fashion statement while ignoring the cultural significance behind it. Using sacred symbols as decorations without any knowledge of their religious meaning. Profiting off of a culture's music, art, or cuisine without giving back to the communities that created them. Cultural appreciation, on the other hand, is like being invited to that same party, bringing a dish to share, and engaging in meaningful conversations with the other guests. It's about acknowledging the history, the struggles and the triumphs of a community, and celebrating their culture in a way that honors its origins. It's about recognizing that culture is not a costume, it's not a trend, it's not something to be exploited.
Chapter 7: Racism in the Global Context.
We often think of racism as an American problem, but the reality is that it's a global issue, from the streets of Brazil to the villages of India, from the bustling cities of Europe to the remote islands of the Pacific. Racism rears its ugly head in countless forms. It's a shapeshifter, adapting to different cultures and contexts, but always rooted in the same toxic belief in the superiority of one group over another. Let's talk about colorism, a pervasive issue in many parts of the world, including India, where lighter skin is often associated with beauty, status, and even intelligence. It's a legacy of colonialism, where European standards of beauty were imposed and internalized, creating a hierarchy based on skin tone that persists to this day. And then there's the rise of anti-black sentiment in places like China, where racist stereotypes about black people are often perpetuated through media and popular culture. From discriminatory housing practices to verbal and physical harassment, black people in China often face a level of hostility and prejudice that can be shocking to outsiders. The fight against racism is a global one. It requires solidarity, allyship, and a willingness to challenge prejudice and discrimination wherever we see it. So where do we go from here? The first step is acknowledging that the conversation on race is far from over. Through expert interviews, historical footage, and cutting-edge visuals, this video has attempted to present these complex issues from multiple perspectives. We will also engage the audience in thought-provoking questions and encourage a deeper understanding of how race continues to shape our world, forcing us to rethink our assumptions, values, and futures.